It's been 20 years now, but I'm still traumatized by what happened when I was 15. Let me explain. Being 15, there wasn't many jobs available in our small town, so I took up babysitting. Easy job, right? Well, not for me. At first, it was great, easy money most of the time. Show up, play with the kids a bit, put them to bed, and chill out in front of the TV till the parents came home. But my last job changed all that. I went to babysit for John and Kim Clark that Saturday evening. I loved babysitting for them. They're twins, Sammy and Charlie. They were a great joy to be around, and they actually were very well behaved for 5-year-olds. I arrived around 7 p.m. The boys had already had dinner and were playing in the backyard. When they saw me, they were so excited they couldn't wait for their parents to finally leave. They practically pushed John and Kim out the door. We stayed outside until dark, having a great time. When we finally came in, the boys were so exhausted, so I got them cleaned up and tucked into bed. Turning on their nightlight, I told them I'll be right downstairs if they needed me. I don't think they heard me though, because almost as soon as they put their heads on the pillows, they were out. I made my way to the living room to watch a little TV. While channel surfing, I came across a scary movie that I had been wanting to see and decided to go ahead and watch it. Suddenly, the phone rang and I jumped, laughed at myself for getting scared. Guess I was really into the movie. "Hello, Clark residence," I said as I picked up the phone. "Have you checked the children?" The voice on the other end of the phone said. "What? Who is this?" I asked. It didn't sound like Mr. Clark. The caller hung up and I looked at the phone confused and a little scared. I went up to Sammy and Charlie's room and peeked in. Sound asleep just like I left them. I went back to the living room thinking maybe it was one of my friends trying to play a prank on me and continued watching the movie. About a half hour later, the phone rang again. "Hello, Clark residence," I answered. "Have you checked the children?" the creepy caller said again. "Okay, enough is enough. Who is this? Is this Jimmy?" I asked. Then all I heard on the other end was some heavy breathing. Then the caller hung up. I called my friend Jimmy and found out he was out of town with his family, so there was no way it could have been him. This was really starting to scare me now, so I called 911. The 911 operator took all the information and said they would send the police out, and in the meantime they would trace the call. Not even 5 minutes later, the phone rang again. "Stop calling!" I yelled to the caller. "Sarah, calm down. This is the dispatcher from 911. We have traced the call. You need to get out of the house immediately. The call is coming from inside the house. The police are on their way." I dropped the phone and ran to the front door. When I opened it, there was a man standing there and I screamed as he grabbed my arm. "Sarah, it's the police. We're here to help. Get outside now. We will get the boys." I ran to the sidewalk where another officer was waiting. I was shaking and crying so bad, almost hysterical at this point. Why was this happening to me? Who is doing this? A few minutes later, I heard the officer inside call for backup. The officer that was with me ran inside. It wasn't long before both came back out, slowly, with blood on their hands. They discarded their gloves they were wearing and put me in the car. I later found out the children were found slain in their beds. The bloody axe by the open window. But the killer, gone. They have never caught the psycho who did this, and to this day, I will never babysit again. Most people have heard one version or another of the babysitter legend, or even the man upstairs legend. Although it's evolved through the years, it's a classic urban legend, mostly told at slumber parties and around campfires. But the truth behind the story is just as horrifying as the fictional story itself. maybe more because it really happened. In March 1950, 13-year-old Janet Chrisman was found murdered in a home she was babysitting at. Janet Chrisman was born on March 21st, 1936, to Charles and Lula Chrisman. She was the oldest child of 3. Janet was often described as a loving, church-going 8th grader who had a knack for playing the piano in the choir, was intelligent and independent for her age. She was known to work relentlessly for the things she wanted. To earn extra money, she would often babysit for 2 families in the area, the Romacks and the Muellers. At that particular moment, she was working to buy a special dress she wanted for Easter. On Saturday, March 18, 1950, there was a dance held for local students. Janet was invited, but she actually declined because she had plans to babysit for the Romacks. She was hoping after this job she would have enough money to buy that special dress. The Romacks had recently moved to the outskirts of Columbia, Missouri, and Ann Romack was pregnant. Because of their recent move, Ann and her husband Ed hadn't been able to have a night for themselves for a long while. So when the chance arose to spend some time with friends, they jumped at the opportunity. Janet arrived right around dusk, around 7:30 that evening, and Ann told her that Gregory, their son, enjoyed sleeping with the radio on and shouldn't be too much trouble. Just before heading out, though, Ed quickly taught Janet how to load, unload, and fire the shotgun, just in case. He also told her he was putting it by the front door and to make sure the doors were locked. And if anyone came to the door, she was to turn on the front porch light. Throughout the evening, the weather started turning bad. Temperatures dropped to the mid-20s, and a storm brought rain and sleet. Despite the weather, everything was fine, normal even. That is, until about 10:30 p.m. when the Boone County Sheriff's Department received a frantic call. With a storm about, the night for the local police was relatively quiet, so when the phone rang, Officer Ray McGowan answered and asked what the emergency was. He was immediately met with a screaming woman saying, "Come quick." When he tried to ask where, the phone line went dead. McGowan knew the horror and panic coming from the caller was real and not some prank. But there was nothing he could do except wait for her to call back. The first call was too short to trace. A little while later, Ann called home to check on things, and nobody answered. But because of the time of night, she assumed Janet had fallen asleep, so she wasn't too concerned. The Romacks spent a couple more hours with their friends and then headed home around 1:15 a.m. When Ann and Ed pulled into their muddy driveway, they noticed the porch light was on and the front window blinds were wide open. When Ed went to unlock the door, he realized it was already unlocked. The couple then entered their home and were met with a grisly scene in their living room. They found Janet lying in a pool of blood in the middle of their living room floor. She had been violently raped and murdered. Her legs were spread wide, and there was a head wound from a blunt instrument, multiple puncture wounds that looked like it came from a mechanical pencil, and a cord that had been cut from their electric iron wrapped tightly around her neck. Just a few feet away, the phone was dangling off the hook. Ann panicked and quickly ran upstairs to check their son, who, surprisingly, was still asleep and unharmed, completely unaware of the horrific scene just downstairs. Ed immediately called the police, and Sheriff Glenn Powell from Boone County Sheriff's Department arrived with several other detectives and bloodhounds. Soon the city police arrived, and even though they did not have jurisdiction because the Romacks lived 100 yards outside the city limits, that didn't stop them from trying to take over the investigation. Both agencies were uncooperative with one another and couldn't even agree on a method of entry the suspect used. Inside the house, it was clear to both departments, though, that Janet tried to fight off her attacker. Upon continued search, they found the back door unlocked and ajar. The search dogs managed to track the assailant's scent for about a mile before losing it. But back at the house, male footprints were found by the side window, which had been shattered. Because of the muddy papers found by the piano just inside the window, several of the authorities believed this was how the attacker got in. The other theory was that Janet knew her attacker and was friendly at first just to gain access because of the instructions Ed had given her before leaving. It also appeared the attacker knew where the electric iron was located. Both departments worked tirelessly, doing stakeouts, canvassing the surrounding area, and even asking the public's assistance in reporting anyone who looked suspicious. They even questioned Janet's family, friends, and classmates at school. During the process, along with local residents calling in possible leads, several potential suspects were found, but it quickly became evident that a racial bias was present because most of the men in question were black. Seemed that the police were getting nowhere on the case. As the police continued their investigation, one prime suspect came up, Robert Mueller, and the evidence against him began to really pile up. Robert Mueller was 27 years old at the time and friends with Ed Romack since high school. After serving in World War II, he returned to Columbia, Missouri, working as a tailor. People remember him for dressing well and always carrying a mechanical pencil in his shirt or jacket pocket. When Robert came home and reconnected with Ed, they would often spend time together. Ed reported that Robert had always had a lustful eye for virgin women and spoke about wanting to defile someone young. Janet also babysat for him as well several times, and he recalled Robert commenting about her well-developed body. Ann Romack reported that she always felt uncomfortable around Robert because of his uninvited sexual advances. Just the day before the murder, Robert was at her house, helping her hem a dress when she said he tried to grope her breast. In her formal statement, she described him as a man who doesn't use words, he uses his hands. Another mark against Robert is the morning of Janet's death, he contacted her and asked if she would babysit for him that night, but she declined because she already promised the Romacks. Robert still managed to attend the gathering with his friends, but excused himself for a few hours into the party, saying he had to meet the doctor who was attending his son. Robert left for about 2 hours before returning. When the police questioned the doctor, it was discovered that he never went to the Mueller's residence that night. What implicated Robert further was when Ed got a phone call from him the morning of the murder, asking if he needed any help cleaning up all the blood throughout the house. At that point, he shouldn't have known anything about the tragedy. It hadn't even been printed in the local newspaper yet. Ed also claimed that later on, Robert would speak to him about what happened, discussing at length about how he believed the murder unfolded. He said that breaking the window to gain entrance would be too loud and noticeable. Instead, it would be easier to simply knock on the door and say that Ed sent me here to get poker chips. The amount of circumstantial evidence was shocking, and in May 1950, with all the evidence against him, police went to Robert's home to speak with him. Instead of following procedure of arrest warrant and interview, they transported him to a farmhouse outside of the city, where they interrogated him before sending him to the state capitol, where he underwent a polygraph test and passed. After passing the lie detector test, detectives released Robert. But with all the evidence pointing towards him, A judge arranged for a grand jury to investigate the case further. After years and many legal issues, Robert Mueller was never charged because of the level of incompetence the police conduct during the investigation. Robert Mueller eventually moved his family to Arizona and in 2006 passed away. The tragic murder of Janet Chrisman still remains unsolved. We want to give a special shout out to our member, Melissa Ross. Thank you.